Have you ever wondered what the old-time catch wrestlers thought about the full Nelson? Hi guys, my name is Joe and my channel is called Fighting Words, the Martial Arts Library. Now, the subject of the full Nelson came up in the comment section of one of Ramsey Dewey's videos. Ramsey Dewey is an MMA coach out of Shanghai, China, and he made a video talking about the techniques that people think are illegal in MMA but actually aren't. This is at least the second video of the sort that he's made. And among the things he was addressing are neck cranks. They seem super dangerous, and in a manner of speaking are, but they are also perfectly legal in mixed martial arts competition. Anyway, in the comments section, I kicked things off by recommending a book to him that is Catch Wrestling by Mark S. Hewitt. A wild and woolly look at the early days of pro wrestling in America. Now, that was at a time when the phrase professional wrestling meant the same thing as professional boxing or professional football. You were wrestling for money. It hadn't turned into quite the theater that it has turned into these days. Anyway, in here, I related a story. There was a wrestler by the name of Charles Olson. Now, the author, Mark Hewitt, includes two stories of Charles Olson in here being responsible for breaking his opponent's neck in a chapter called Death Stalks the Mat. And one of them in particular had to do with the full Nelson, which is why I brought it up. And the story goes like this. I'm not going to be reading it exactly verbatim. In the narrative structure of the book, Mr. Hewitt has decided to introduce Olson by the pseudonym, the working name that he was wrestling under at the time. I'm just going to be calling him Olson, and I'm going to be cutting out the parts that don't really seem pertinent. Olson maintained control and slowly worked his grip into a full Nelson. He clamped the hold on tight and began leveraging Lake's shoulders to the mat for a pinfall. Lake squirmed wildly and flung his body around to effect an escape. Olson held firm, and suddenly a loud crack rang out. Lake went limp. Olson relinquished the hold, and the young wrestler flopped motionless to the mat. 2 days later, he died. Now, in response to me recommending this book and the reasons why, another YouTube user started asking me, further questions like, oh, well, what was going on? How did this happen? Why was this banned? And one of the things I did, of course, was relate the story. And furthermore, I started looking into why this hold may have been banned. Like, was it banned after this match? Was it banned because of this match? Well, it was banned in amateur competition, but not in professional competition, up to the point where professional wrestling was no longer a competition. I have a book from 1897, written by Hugh Leonard, called The Handbook of Wrestling, where he mentions that the full Nelson that far back had already been banned from amateur competition. Looking for these answers, I also came across an article on Bloody Elbow, which I will link in the comments, or the description. Link in the description. And that discusses catch as catch can in the early Olympic events, and mentions that early on, around the turn of the century, that punishing holds had been banned. He doesn't specifically mention the full Nelson. I am going to be linking back to that idea in a second. And unfortunately, I haven't been able to find any of the specific wrestling rules for those particular Olympic events. Now, dovetailing onto the question of whether it was banned because of similar reasons. There are two books that I can reference. They were both written in the 30s. Now, one is by E.J. Harrison. It's called Wrestling, Catch as Catch Can, Cumberland to Westmoreland, and All In. And that was published in 1936. And in there he mentions that it was banned because a continental wrestler, now Harrison's from England, a continental wrestler, so somebody from continental Europe, had his neck broken, and that's why it was banned. There was also a fellow by the name of George Robinson, who, based on his interviews with Frank Gotch, wrote a book called How to Wrestle, Instructions based on the work of Frank A. Gotch. And that was published in 1934. And in that one, he says that several wrestlers had had their necks broken. He doesn't name anyone specifically. Again, these are a generation or so removed from, the 1911 incident where Charlie Olson broke this poor fellow's neck. Now, I've also looked into similar texts. Actually, I looked into every text I had on old school wrestling, looking for the answers here, right? One I have is from a book by E.C. Gallagher. It's on amateur wrestling, and he notes that in amateur wrestling, he says, all holds are allowed except for those used for punishment, and the full Nelson is the first one he mentions. So there seems to be this idea that it's not so much used as a way to achieve a pin, because he shows many, many other moves, several of which are banned these days or would be seen as submissions. This is from 1925. But they are not banned because they are used to force a wrestler onto his shoulders. But I guess the idea is that the full Nelson really isn't useful for that, that particular goal. That it's used more just to wear the guy down. Similarly, a book from 1930 by a fellow named Spiros Vorius, which I'm probably butchering right now. He says that the full Nelson is banned because it restricts breathing. I'm not sure about that. Okay, yeah, if you compress the chin, I can see how it may, after a fashion, restrict breathing, but, honestly, I think the scissors was still legal then, and that'll restrict breathing, or a, various cradles, could also have the same effect. You're being bundled up, your diaphragm and windpipe are sort of being compressed. So, again, it had been banned for at least 30 years by the time he makes that statement, because it's from 1930. I do question it, though. I'm a little bit doubtful, just because, I've used the full Nelson, I've been in a full Nelson, I drill it. I don't think it is that restrictive of the breathing, actually. Now, here we also have Robinson again, the guy who published the book, inspired by Frank Gotch. He says that it is a punishing hold and is used little in championship matches. And that sort of got me thinking about this other thing that I kept reading in all these books over and over again. And that is that apparently the old-time wrestlers didn't really have a lot of use for a full Nelson. And I think that sort of segues nicely into the other part of this question. The full Nelson is sort of a signature of old school wrestling, right? Well, apparently many old school wrestlers didn't think too highly of it. For instance, Ed W. Smith's book from 1912 says that it's not much used by professionals. Although he will say that it's dangerous when it's properly applied, and actually references old school wrestler Farmer Burns as being, one of these guys who can apply it dangerously. Similarly, George Bothner, who himself was an old-time wrestler at some of the lighter weights, he wrote a book in 1912 where he says it's not a very practical hold because it gives the opponent a lot of chances to counter it. Similarly, we have Frederick Toombs from 1916 in his book How to Wrestle. And he says, "The full Nelson is a grip that is difficult for the offensive wrestler to carry to complete effect. This hold is an ineffective one, and wrestlers do not attach to it much practical value. In the first place, it lays the offensive athlete open to counters, and he himself uses a great deal of energy, which he might better save for more valuable operations." Paul Prynne, who was another wrestler and I think also a wrestling coach, had a book in 1925 where he will also note that the full Nelson actually puts a man at a disadvantage in trying to apply it. A book from 1912, Wrestling Catch as Catch Can, by Hitchcock and Nelligan, actually show numerous counters for the full Nelson, and most of those counters wind up putting the guy trying to apply the full Nelson into a pinning position. And finally, one other thing to point out here, the full Nelson being used to break a neck. One thing that I noticed, especially with the earlier books, was that a lot of times they're showing ways to counter the full Nelson, and it basically involves like a headstand or spinning and bridging. You're putting weight on top of the head, on top of the neck, and then, as the description says, throwing your body around violently in an effort to get out. And similarly, the second instance where Charles Olson was responsible for his opponent breaking his neck, he had him in a maneuver called a hammerlock and crotch hold. So I'm going to put a photo up of that. And again, the text suggests that this gentleman was trying to bridge up on his head in an effort to not let his shoulders hit the mat. And it was during that attempt that, the crack was heard and he yelled out, I'm not sure how dangerous it is by itself without the other wrestler putting all their weight on their already compromised neck and then trying to throw their body back and forth over it. When I have seen severe neck injuries, I'd say primarily in professional wrestling, also some other combat sports, a lot of times it seems to occur with the athlete's weight going over their head, which is being supported on the ground or against another surface. So I'm wondering if it's more that motion that's led to the more severe injuries. So to wrap things up, I wasn't able to find out conclusively why the full Nelson was banned, like if there was one particular incident. I think we can say that it was definitely responsible for injuring wrestlers, or wrestlers were at least in the hold when they were injured. But it is also refreshing to see that for competitive purposes, it wasn't actually valued all that highly by even some of the better wrestlers at the time because of how much it left you open to something else. So it seems like it was primarily used as a way to wear down another wrestler and not really a way to actually get a finish. And I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I'm going to put my bibliography for all these books that I have, almost all of them on PDF. I'm going to put that bibliography in the closing little title page, I am going to link that article from Bloody Elbow in the comments. It's on the history of catch as catch can and the early Olympics. So if you guys have any interest at all in old school, catch as catch can wrestling, these are good resources to look for, and actually a lot of them are available on PDF. So you might even be able to get a lot of these for free. Anyway, guys, that's all I have for this week, and I appreciate you letting me prattle on about this. I love researching the minutia of like weird questions and answers and stuff like that. So again, I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's been a little educational, and if you share a passion for old school wrestling like I do, I hope that you find these resources valuable. And I want to thank you, and I'll see you next week.